Life by Dr. Pat. Leading innovation in fertility excellence.
Deep dive into reproduction with Life by Dr. Pat.
All right, let's get ready to dive into something. A topic that people don't really talk about a lot: infertility. We're doing a deep dive today, thanks to this article from a Thai fertility clinic. It's on their website, and it's written by an actual, reproductive medicine doctor.
Oh, wow.
And you might be thinking, Thailand?
Yeah.
What's that got to do with me?
Right.
But infertility is a global thing.
It really is.
It affects people everywhere. And so no matter where you live, understanding the science behind this can be really helpful.
Yeah, it can be a really empowering thing for sure.
So before we, get into all the details, what exactly is infertility, medically speaking?
Well, the article had a pretty straightforward definition. If a couple has been having, regular unprotected sex for a year,
Okay.
and they haven't gotten pregnant,
Right.
then that's what's considered infertility. It's not really saying what is wrong.
Yeah.
It's more of a diagnosis of what's not working.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes total sense. So it's not like, a simple yes or no.
Right.
There's more to it.
Exactly. There's a lot more to uncover. And you also have to keep in mind that infertility can impact both men and women. And a lot of times it involves multiple factors.
Oh, okay.
It's like a puzzle where we have to find all the missing pieces.
Okay. So
Yeah.
let's start putting the puzzle together then, piece by piece. The article goes into female factor infertility,
Okay.
and it breaks it down by organ. The ovaries, the fallopian tubes, and the uterus.
Right.
So let's start with the ovaries.
Okay.
What kind of things can go wrong there?
So when we talk about the ovaries, there are two main problems that can lead to infertility.
Okay.
The first one is called anovulation.
Anovulation.
Yeah. And that means that the ovaries aren't releasing eggs
Okay.
the way they should.
Gotcha.
The second one is something called diminished ovarian reserve.
Mm-hmm.
And that just means there are fewer eggs available than there should be.
Yeah.
Now, that can be because of age or other factors.
It's so interesting to me how, things that don't seem related can actually impact, our fertility. Like the article mentions extreme exercise.
Yeah.
Or even eating disorders can, disrupt ovulation.
Totally.
It's just crazy how interconnected our bodies are.
It is. We often think about these things separately, but our bodies are complex systems.
Yeah.
And when we talk about diminished ovarian reserve, age isn't the only thing that can cause it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Early menopause can cause it.
Mm.
Or cancer treatments. Even autoimmune disorders can play a role.
Wow. That's a lot to think about. Okay, so let's move on to the fallopian tubes.
Right.
Those tiny pathways that connect the ovaries to the uterus?
Yeah.
What are some of the issues that can come up there?
Well, you've probably heard of blocked fallopian tubes.
Yeah, I have.
That's a big one. Because fertilization usually happens in the fallopian tubes. So if there's a blockage there, it's like a roadblock to pregnancy.
Okay, so what causes these blockages?
So the article lists a few things.
Mm-hmm.
Infections, like pelvic inflammatory disease
Huh.
or some STIs, can lead to scarring,
Oh, okay.
and that can block the tubes. And then there's endometriosis. Have you heard of
I
that?
have, yeah.
So that's when tissue that's similar to the lining of the uterus grows outside the uterus,
Mm-hmm.
and that can also create blockages.
Oh, wow.
And then even scar tissue from past surgeries can obstruct those tubes.
Okay, so we've covered the ovaries, the fallopian tubes.
Mhm.
Now get ready for this.
Okay.
The uterus is where things get really interesting. I had no idea that the shape of your uterus could actually matter.
It really does.
Infertility.
Yeah. So the article talks about something called congenital malformations of the uterus.
Okay.
And that just means that somebody's born with a uterus that's shaped differently.
Okay.
And that can make it harder to get pregnant or carry a pregnancy to term.
Oh, wow. So even if everything else is working perfectly, the shape of the uterus itself can be a factor.
It really can.
Yeah.
And even if the shape is typical, there could be other issues within the uterus that can cause problems.
Oh.
The article mentions things like fibroids,
Okay.
adenomyosis,
Yeah.
and polyps,
Wow.
all of which can interfere with implantation
Okay.
or a healthy pregnancy.
So it's like,
It's almost like you're trying to plant a seed
yeah.
in a garden that's full of rocks and weeds.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot harder for it to take root and grow.
That's a great analogy. Okay, so we've talked about the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, the uterus, but the article also talks about another important factor, and that's the interplay between the mother's body and the embryo.
Right. Because it's not just about each individual organ.
Right.
It's about how they all work together. So the lining of the uterus has to be perfectly receptive
Okay.
for an embryo to implant.
Gotcha.
It's almost like when you're preparing soil for a seed to take root.
Yeah.
It has to be just right.
Yeah. So even if like a woman's organs are all functioning properly,
Yeah.
if the timing's off
Right.
or the uterus isn't receptive, it can still be a challenge to conceive.
Exactly. And sometimes the body's own defense mechanisms can actually work against pregnancy.
Oh, wow.
The article gave an example of antiphospholipid syndrome,
Okay.
and that's when the immune system attacks the developing embryo.
So it's like the system that's designed to protect us
Yeah.
can actually get in the way.
It's ironic, right?
Totally.
The very system that's meant to protect us can actually become a hurdle to creating life.
It's just amazing how much has to go right for pregnancy to actually occur.
It really is.
You know, we've covered a lot about the female side of things,
Right.
but let's not forget about male factor infertility,
Yes.
which is just as common, but people don't talk about it as much.
No, they don't. And the article points out that men often don't have any noticeable symptoms
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
of infertility. So that makes testing really crucial.
Okay, so what are some of the things that can cause male factor infertility?
Well, the article kind of put it into a few main categories.
Okay.
Issues with sperm production
Yeah.
or transport,
Okay.
hormonal imbalances,
Mhm.
and genetic factors.
Okay. So there's a pretty wide range of potential problems there, too.
There really is. So it can be anything from something called varicocele,
Okay.
which is basically like having varicose veins near the testicles.
Varicose veins?
Yeah, like those bulging veins that you see on people's legs sometimes.
Uh-huh.
That, but near the testicles. That's what a varicocele is.
Okay, so that's one possibility. What else?
It can also be injuries, certain infections like mumps that affect the testicles, lifestyle factors like smoking, alcohol,
Aw.
even past cancer treatments. It's a pretty long list.
Wow, so we've learned that both male and female infertility can come from a lot of different factors.
Definitely.
This is a really complex topic,
It is.
but knowing all of this, it kind of empowers us, right?
Yeah, it does.
It gives us the knowledge to ask questions and advocate for our own health.
Heavily. And that's something that the article really emphasized, the importance of understanding the root cause
Yeah.
of infertility
Yeah.
in order to find the best treatment. It's not about placing blame.
Right.
It's about getting the right information
Yeah.
to make informed decisions.
Yeah, it's like solving a mystery, huh?
Yeah.
We've uncovered so many clues in this deep dive into infertility.
Right.
And, like we said, it's rarely a simple issue.
No, it's more like a detective story,
It is.
piecing together all the different factors to figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And as the article points out, understanding the why is really important
Yeah.
for finding effective treatment.
That is such a key point. This article, it doesn't really get into specific treatments, but it makes it really clear that infertility is treatable in a lot of cases. But the first step is always a diagnosis, figuring out why a couple is struggling to conceive. That's the foundation for choosing the right treatment approach. Right. It's like you wouldn't treat a headache without knowing, is it from stress? Is it a sinus infection or
Exactly.
something else entirely?
Exactly. And that's where working with a fertility specialist can be so helpful.
Yeah.
They can run tests, evaluate both partners, and then can help guide you toward the best course of action.
So it sounds like knowledge is power when it comes to infertility.
It really is.
Even though, we've only scratched the surface, just understanding the basics can really help someone ask the right questions and advocate for themselves.
Absolutely. And, while this article focuses mainly on the biological side of infertility, I think it's also important to remember the emotional impact, too, which can be huge.
Yeah, you're so right. The emotional aspect is something that the article doesn't really touch on.
Yeah.
But it's a huge part of the experience.
Yeah.
Infertility can be so challenging emotionally, and it can really affect individuals, relationships, even how people see themselves.
That's true. There's often a lot of shame and secrecy surrounding infertility, and that can make it even harder to cope. There's this unspoken pressure to have children.
Yeah.
And when it doesn't happen easily, people can feel like they've failed in some way.
Yeah, it's like they're carrying this invisible burden.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, the cultural expectations and societal pressures around having children can definitely add another layer of complexity.
I agree. We need to create spaces where people feel comfortable talking about these challenges.
Yeah.
And seeking support and finding healthy ways to cope. It's not just about the science, it's about the whole human experience.
You're right.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to this and infertility is something you're facing, you're not alone.
You really aren't.
There are resources available, and just seeking support can make such a big difference.
Absolutely. And even though this deep dive is coming to an end, your journey of learning and exploration doesn't have to.
Okay, so we've covered a lot today. The medical definition of infertility, the complexities of both female and male factors, the emotional weight that often comes with it. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with a final thought to think about. The article we've been discussing comes from a Thai fertility clinic, and it got me thinking about how different cultures view infertility.
That's a fascinating question. This article doesn't really get into cultural perspectives,
No.
but it's definitely something worth considering.
Yeah.
Infertility is such a sensitive topic.
Mm-hmm.
And, cultural norms, beliefs, expectations,
Right.
those can all play a role in how people experience and cope with it.
Exactly. In some cultures, there might be a really strong stigma
Oh, yeah.
attached to infertility, which can lead to people feeling isolated or ashamed.
Absolutely.
But in others, there might be more open conversations and support systems in place.
That's true. And even access to healthcare and fertility treatments. That can vary so much depending on where you live and what resources are available.
It's true. So it's not just about the individual's journey, right?
Right.
It's also about the broader social context in which that journey unfolds.
It always comes back to the bigger picture. And so this raises a question for our listener.
Yeah.
How does your own culture view infertility? Are there any prevailing beliefs or attitudes
Yeah.
that shaped your understanding of this issue?
That's such a great question to think about. And it reminds us that even though the science of infertility is universal, the human experience of it
Yeah.
is deeply personal and often intertwined with those cultural factors.
It is. I think that's a perfect place to end on. We've gone from the cellular level of eggs and sperm to the societal perceptions of infertility.
Right.
Just shows how multifaceted this topic really is.
Well, it's been quite a journey. We've learned so much in this deep dive into the world of infertility. We unpacked the biological complexities, explored the emotional impact, and even touched on the cultural dimensions. I hope this has left you, our listener, feeling more informed, empowered, and maybe even a little bit curious to learn more.
And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah.
There's so much more to explore and understand about infertility, both personally and societally.
So keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep the conversation going. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Yeah, it really makes you think how something so personal can also be so connected to cultural beliefs and societal norms.
Right.
It makes you realize that infertility isn't just a medical issue.
Right.
It's a human experience
Yeah,
that's shaped by the world around us.
it really is. And it highlights how important it is to talk about infertility,
Yeah.
openly and honestly, both in our own communities and on a larger scale.
Right.
The more we talk about it,
Yeah.
the more we can break down those stigmas
Right.
and support people who are struggling.
I totally agree. And I think this deep dive has been a good step in that direction. We've covered so much: the biology of conception,
Right.
the emotional side of infertility, the cultural perspectives. It's been quite a journey. And I hope our listener feels empowered by what we've talked about today.
Yeah.
Empowered to ask questions, seek support, and advocate for themselves.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, right?
It really is.
And understanding infertility can make a huge difference.
It can.
Yeah.
And this is just the start.
Yeah.
There's so much more to learn about this topic,
That's true.
both personally and as a society.
Well, to our listener, we encourage you to keep,
Yep.
keep digging, keep asking questions, keep the conversation going.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Leading. Innovation. Fertility. Excellence. Life by Dr. Pat. Leading innovation in fertility excellence.